Nobody in that hospital knew the man mopping the hallway of the 14th floor was the one who owned it. He wore the same gray uniform as every other custodian on staff. Collar frayed at one corner, name tag clipped slightly crooked, a pair of rubber-soled shoes that squeaked faintly on the polished floors. He pushed his mop bucket slowly, pausing to wring the mop head over a corner where the tile met the wall, the way someone who had done it 1,000 times would. Nobody looked twice at him. That was the point. His name was Weston Crane, 41 years old, CEO of Crane Medical Holdings, a private healthcare group that owned 11 hospitals across the country, with the flagship property being Meridian General in downtown Chicago. He had built it into what it was now, one of the top-rated private hospitals in the Midwest. Over 15 years of decisions that most people in his position would have been too cautious to make. He was not a cautious man. But 3 weeks ago, his head of operations had handed him a report that made him set down his coffee and read it twice. Patient satisfaction scores at Meridian General had dropped 17 points in 8 months. Complaints filed against administrative staff had tripled. 2 senior nurses had resigned without giving reasons. And buried at the bottom of page 9 was a single line that stayed with him longer than anything else. Multiple patients reported feeling dismissed and unwelcome upon arrival. He had boards he could dispatch, consultants he paid a great deal of money to investigate these things. But something about that line made him want to see it for himself. So here he was. Walt, according to his name tag, borrowed from a custodial contractor his HR director a favor to. 3rd shift, Monday through Thursday. He had been at it for 11 days. Most of what he had seen was ordinary. The staff was tired, the way hospital staff is always tired. The vending machines on the 3rd floor were perpetually out of the things people actually wanted. The elevator closest to the surgical wing moved at a speed that suggested it was operated by reluctant ghosts. None of it alarmed him. What alarmed him was the front desk. The admissions area at Meridian General sat at the center of the ground floor. A wide, curved counter with 6 stations, flanked by rows of waiting chairs, upholstered in the kind of blue that was meant to be calming but mostly looked institutional. It was the first thing every patient saw when they walked through the door. And for the past 3 weeks, Weston had watched the way it operated. There was a head of admissions, a man named Stuart Pratt, who wore his badge on a lanyard that also held a keychain with a miniature Chicago Bulls logo on it. Stuart Pratt arrived every morning at 9:05, which was 5 minutes after the desk was supposed to be staffed. He spent the first 20 minutes of every shift at his private workstation behind the partition, not visible from the waiting area. He had perfected a particular way of looking busy without doing anything, fingers moving over a keyboard while his eyes tracked something slightly to the left of the screen. When patients approached his station directly, Stuart Pratt had a way of making them feel as though they had interrupted something enormously important. His sentences were curt. His eye contact was minimal. When a woman came in on the 3rd day, Weston was there, holding a folder of insurance documents and looking slightly bewildered. Stuart had looked at her for 4 seconds, said, "You need pre-registration, that's online," and returned to his screen before she finished asking her question. She stood there for a moment, blinking, then walked slowly back to her seat and stared at the floor. Weston had been 6 feet away, near the wall with his mop, and he had felt something move through his chest that he recognized, with some discomfort, as rage. But what happened next was what made him stop mopping entirely. A woman appeared from the corridor that connected to the records office. She was clearly just coming off another task, still carrying a tablet, her ID clipped to the front pocket of her light blue scrubs top. She must have seen the same woman sitting alone because she walked directly to her and crouched down beside the chair. "Hi, I'm Juniper. Were you just at the front desk?" Her voice was low, easy, the kind of voice that didn't draw attention to itself. The patient looked up. "I was trying to ask about pre-registration, but I've got you. Let me just take a look at your paperwork." Juniper set her tablet on the empty chair beside her and opened the folder the woman held out. "Okay, so this is actually already complete. Your primary care doctor's office submitted this last Thursday. You're all set. You just need to check in at Station 3 and I'll walk you over." The woman's whole face changed. Oh, I didn't know. I drove 40 minutes and I was worried I'd done something wrong." Juniper smiled. "You didn't do anything wrong. You actually did everything right." Weston watched her walk the woman to Station 3, have a brief word with the admissions clerk there, and then return to wherever she had been going, tablet back in hand, as though it were just a thing she did between tasks. He thought about her for the rest of his shift. Her full name he found out through 3 days of observation and one careful look at the staff roster he requested from HR under the pretense of a routine third-shift audit was Juniper Lee Callahan. She was a patient services coordinator, which meant she existed somewhere in the organizational gray zone between clinical staff and administration. Not a nurse, not a receptionist, but the person who ended up doing the work that fell between those categories. She had been at Meridian General for 4 years. She was 29 years old. She lived, based on her emergency contact address on file, in Pilsen. She took the Blue Line. She was also, Weston learned from watching her for 6 more days, the reason the admissions area functioned at all. She covered for Stuart Pratt's absences without acknowledging that she was doing it. She knew the names of patients who came in regularly, an elderly man named Harold who came for dialysis 3 times a week, a teenager named Marcus who was there for PT and always arrived looking like he hadn't slept, a woman with a young daughter who spent a lot of time in the oncology waiting room. She remembered details. She asked follow-up questions. She flagged things before they became problems. She was also, when the situation called for it, entirely unafraid to say exactly what she thought. He witnessed this firsthand on a Thursday afternoon. A man in an expensive coat, charcoal wool, the kind you buy at a department store on Michigan Avenue, came through the doors and went straight to the desk with the energy of someone who believed waiting was something that happened to other people. His name, as Weston later pieced together, was Clifford Bassett. He was apparently someone's board-connected donor and had developed the impression that this gave him special administrative status at a hospital he had once written a check to. He bypassed the line entirely and planted himself in front of Juniper Station. "I have an appointment in 15 minutes with Dr. Elmore, and I need someone to call up and let them know I'm here. I don't do waiting rooms." Juniper looked up from her screen. She did not adjust her expression at all. "I can absolutely let Dr. Elmore's office know you've arrived. Can I have your name and date of birth, Bassett?" "Clifford. And I'd like water while I wait. Somewhere I can sit without." He looked around with the expression of someone evaluating a used car lot. "Whatever this is." "We have a patient lounge on the 2nd floor, Juniper said. "I'll call up to Dr. Elmore's office now. If you'd like water, there's a dispenser at the end of this corridor on the right." She was already reaching for her phone. "I'd like someone to bring it to me." Juniper set the phone down gently. She looked at Clifford Bassett with the measured calm of a person who has already calculated exactly how much patience they are willing to extend. "Mr. Bassett, I want to make sure you get to your appointment comfortably, and I'm happy to help with that. But this is an admissions desk, not a concierge service, and right now there are 6 people behind you who also have places to be. I'm going to call up to Dr. Elmore's office, and then I'm going to check in the next person. If you'd like to wait in the lounge, I'll have someone from patient services text you when they're ready." There was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds. Clifford Bassett straightened his coat. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," she said. "You told me, Clifford Bassett. Date of birth, please." Weston, leaning against the far wall near the elevator, felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He thought it might be admiration. He went to his actual office that evening, the one on the 32nd floor of a building 12 blocks away, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that had been described in a business magazine once as unsentimentally stunning. He sat at his desk for a while without turning on the lights. His head of operations, Sandra, called at 7:15. He let it ring. He had a board meeting in the morning. He had a dinner next week with the executive team that ran his Philadelphia property. He had a 2-page summary of restructuring recommendations that had been sitting in his inbox for 9 days. Because every time he opened it, he found himself thinking about something else. Tonight, the something else was a patient services coordinator in the admissions area of his own hospital, who had, apparently without fanfare or expectation of credit, been holding the floor together for 4 years. He found himself wanting to know why she was still a coordinator, who her direct supervisor was, whether she had ever been offered anything more, whether she had ever asked. And underneath those questions, quieter and more inconvenient, a different one. When had he last spoken to someone who was not managing him? He went back the next morning, which was not one of his assigned shifts. He told himself it was because he wanted to observe the desk during peak morning hours. This was not entirely untrue. He arrived early enough to be mopping near the east entrance when she came in. She wore a dark green jacket over her scrubs, hair pulled back, bag on one shoulder, coffee cup in the other hand. The particular posture of someone who has already made 3 decisions before they walked through the door. She slowed when she passed him. "Hey, Walt, you're here early." He had not expected her to know his name, or to notice the schedule. "Coverage," he said. She nodded like that made sense, which it did, because it was a hospital and things always needed covering. Then she paused. "Are you the one who cleaned the spill outside the oncology waiting room last week?" "The big one. Tuesday morning?" He had been. A cart had tipped near the elevator. He had dealt with it. "Yeah," he said. "Good catch. Patient was upset, and that room was already hard enough. You made it easier." She said it the way someone says a thing they actually mean, not as small talk, not as a transaction. Then she went to her station. Weston leaned on his mop and stared at the floor for a long moment. He had run companies. He had given keynotes at conferences. He had been profiled in 4 national publications. Nobody had thanked him for anything in months. He could not remember the last time someone told him he had made something easier. It was during the second week that everything started to shift, and not in the direction Weston had planned. He had been watching Stuart Pratt closely enough by then to understand the full shape of what was happening. Stuart was not merely incompetent. He was, it turned out, actively covering his tracks. 2 junior admissions clerks had come to Juniper separately with concerns about scheduling irregularities, shifts that disappeared from the log, hours that were clocked but not worked, approvals that passed through Stuart's station and were never reviewed. Weston had confirmed enough of this through the audit trail he requested via a third-party HR channel to know that what he was looking at was not a performance issue. It was fraud, small-scale probably, the kind that accumulates slowly, but real. And Stuart Pratt, for all his carelessness with patients and junior staff, had apparently been careful enough to keep his paper trail tidy by making Juniper sign off on documents she had not been shown in full. Weston discovered this on a Wednesday when he was working near the supply corridor and overheard a conversation he was not meant to hear. Stuart's voice, low and too pleased with itself. "If anyone comes asking, the authorization signatures are all there, all legitimate." A second voice, one of the clerks. "But Juniper didn't know what she was signing." "She signed it," Stuart said. "That's what matters." Weston set down the mop. He did not confront Stuart then. He had learned, over 2 decades of running complicated organizations, that the worst thing you could do when you had someone was move too fast. You moved when you had everything. He also, walking back toward the elevator, noticed that his hands were not entirely steady. He arranged the full audit through proper channels the following Friday. The compliance team, the external review firm his general counsel kept on retainer, and a quiet conversation with HR leadership that did not include Stuart's name yet but would. On the Monday after, he came in earlier than usual. Juniper was at her station when a woman arrived, 40s, coat too thin for November, a little breathless, holding the hand of a boy who couldn't have been more than 8. The boy was holding a stuffed bear by one ear. "I don't have an appointment," the woman said. I don't know who to call. My son, he's been having these headaches and I took him to his pediatrician, but they said to come here and I didn't know if I needed to." "Okay," Juniper said. She was already around the desk. "What's his name?" "Theo." She crouched down to the boy's level. "Hey, Theo, I like your bear. Does he have a name?" The boy thought about it. "No, that's fine. Bears don't always need names." She looked up at the mother. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get Theo registered as a walk-in, and then I'm going to talk to the pediatric triage nurse, who is actually very good, and we're going to make sure he gets seen today. Okay? You did exactly the right thing coming here." The mother's eyes went wet at the edges. "I didn't know what else to do." "You don't have to know everything," Juniper said. "That's what we're here for." Weston had stopped walking. He was standing near the pillar by the information board, and he was watching this woman who had, for 4 years, done this every day, in a building she did not own, for a salary he was suddenly deeply ashamed of, with no acknowledgement from anyone who had the authority to give it. He thought of that line in the report. Multiple patients reported feeling dismissed and unwelcome upon arrival. He understood now that those patients had not encountered Juniper Callahan. Because no one who encountered her felt dismissed. She wouldn't allow it. The audit findings came back in full on the following Thursday. The numbers were worse than Weston had expected. Stuart Pratt had been diverting funds through a series of falsified vendor approvals. Small enough amounts individually that none had flagged automatically. Large enough collectively to have stolen over $90,000 from the hospital's operational budget over 22 months. The signature trail was exactly what Stuart had described in that corridor. Juniper's name on documents she had been told were routine budget authorizations. Weston called a meeting with HR, legal, and his COO, Sandra, that afternoon. Stuart was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. The compliance team would handle the formal process from there. And then, because he had been Walt for 3 weeks, and he was tired of it, Weston Crane walked down to the 14th floor, handed the mop to the actual contractor whose uniform he had borrowed, and changed into his own clothes. He took the elevator to the ground floor. The admissions area was in its mid-afternoon rhythm, not quiet, not overwhelmed. Juniper was at her station, going through what looked like patient feedback forms, making notes in the margin with a pen that was running low on ink because she kept shaking it every few lines. He walked up to the desk. She looked up, pen in hand, and did not immediately recognize him. Then something shifted in her expression, a recalibration, the kind that happens when you place a face in a context you didn't expect. "You're not Walt," she said. "No," he said. "I'm Weston Crane. I own this hospital." She did not react the way people usually reacted to that sentence. She did not sit up straighter or suddenly become more helpful or more careful. She looked at him for a moment the way she might look at a document that needed to be read before it was signed. "How long?" she said. 3 weeks. She nodded slowly, as though confirming a theory. "The spill," she said. "You really did clean it yourself." "I did." She set the pen down. "Are you here to tell me I'm in trouble for the signature thing? Because I want you to know I didn't?" "I know," he said. "You're not in trouble." "He is. It's being handled." She exhaled, not dramatically, just a small release, the kind that happens when you've been carrying something for a while and someone finally takes it off the counter. "Okay," she said. "I came to apologize," Weston said. She looked at him more carefully now. "You've been doing the work of 3 people. You've been set up to carry the liability for someone else's theft, and this hospital has apparently given you no indication that anyone above your pay grade noticed any of it. That's a failure of leadership." "My failure." He said it plainly, without performance. "I'm sorry." Juniper was quiet for a moment. Around them, the waiting room continued its low hum, a phone ringing somewhere, a child asking a question, the elevator chiming behind them. "The patient's notice," she said finally. "That's what I actually care about." "I know," he said. "I watched you with a woman and her son this morning. The boy with the stuffed bear." Something softened in her face briefly. "Theo, they got him seen. Migraine triggers. He's going to be okay." "Good." He paused. "I want to talk to you about your role here, officially, if you're willing." She tilted her head slightly. "Define officially." "Formal meeting. My office, or here if you'd rather. I want to understand what's working in this building and what isn't, and I've spent 3 weeks watching, and you are currently my most valuable source of that information. Also, I think you're dangerously underpaid, and probably have been since the day you started." Juniper looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way she had looked at Clifford Bassett, not with hostility, but with a careful, unsentimental clarity that made him feel, not entirely unpleasantly, like he was being read. "I don't want a title change just because you feel bad," she said. "I'm not offering one because I feel bad," he said. "I'm offering one because you've already been doing the job." A pause. "Fine," she said. "But I have 36 open patient feedback forms and I'm finishing them first." "That's fair," he said. He turned to leave and then turned back. "The patient you helped the first day I was here," he said. "The woman with the insurance folder who drove 40 minutes. Do you remember her?" Juniper thought about it. "Gray coat. Pre-registration was already filed." She looked like she was going to cry. "You told her she'd done everything right." Juniper shrugged slightly, like it was obvious. She had. Weston nodded once and walked toward the elevator. The meeting happened 2 days later, in a small conference room off the second-floor administrative corridor. Juniper's choice because, she explained, she didn't want to sit in an office where she had to look up at someone the whole time. Weston found this so reasonable that it slightly embarrassed him. She brought the feedback forms, all 36 completed. He brought the preliminary restructuring proposal, the one that had sat in his inbox for 9 days, and set it on the table without preamble. "I need someone who actually knows how this building works to look at this," he said. "Not to approve it, to tell me what I'm missing." She opened it to page 1. For the next 2 hours, she talked and he listened. She told him about the intake process and where patients were being lost between systems. She told him about the staffing gaps on weekend mornings that everyone knew about and nobody had fixed. She told him about the parking structure and the fact that the accessible spaces were too far from the entrance for patients on walkers, a detail that had apparently been in the facility's feedback system for 14 months. He wrote down everything. At one point she said, "You're actually writing this down," in a tone that suggested she had not entirely expected that. "I'm actually writing this down," he confirmed. She looked at him for a moment. "You really did mop floors for 3 weeks, 11 days. But yes." "Why?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I read a report that said patients felt unwelcome in a building I was responsible for. And I wanted to understand why before I started making decisions. And I'd been making decisions for a long time without being in the room for the actual consequences of them." Juniper was quiet for a moment. "That's either a very humble thing to say," she said, "or a very strategic one." "Both, probably," he admitted. She almost smiled. It was the first time he had seen her come close to it in a context that wasn't about a patient. "Fair enough," she said, and turned back to the report. The restructuring took 4 months. Weston moved the process carefully, because the lesson of the past several weeks had been, among other things, that speed without attention was how you ended up with a Stewart Pratt problem for 22 months without catching it. He consulted Juniper formally twice more. He found himself calling her once between those meetings, on a Thursday evening, to ask a specific question about patient intake protocols, and the conversation lasted 45 minutes and covered 3 entirely unrelated topics, and he sat at his window afterward, looking at the city and thinking about how long it had been since a conversation felt like it had more room in it than he expected. She was appointed Director of Patient Experience in February, a role that, technically, had not existed before, which Juniper pointed out with characteristic directness when he told her. "You made the job up," she said. "I made the title up," he said. "You made the job. I just named it." She gave him the same look she had given Clifford Bassett in November, and then accepted. Stewart Pratt was formally charged in March. The investigation confirmed the fraud, the falsified authorizations, and a secondary issue involving contractor kickbacks that the original audit had not caught. His attorney released a statement. Weston did not read it. What he did instead was drive to the hospital on a Tuesday morning in April, park his own car in the structure, in the correct space, which was now closer to the entrance, because the facility's request had finally been acted on, and walk through the front doors. The admissions area had changed. Not dramatically. The chairs were the same unfortunate blue. The elevator was probably still being operated by reluctant ghosts, but the desk was fully staffed, the flow of patients was moving, and there was a calm that had not been there in November. Juniper was not at the front desk. She had an office now, down the corridor. But she had trained the people who were there, and it showed. Weston checked in at the desk. He had an 8 a.m. with the new head of admissions, and the clerk smiled at him and said, "We'll let Dr. Elmore's office know you're here." He sat in one of the blue chairs to wait. Around him, patients came and went. A man in his 70s held a crossword puzzle and a pen that probably worked better than Juniper's had. A young woman in a hospital bracelet walked slowly past with someone who was probably her sister. His phone buzzed. A message from Juniper. "You're early. I saw you on the front desk camera. Very on brand." He typed back, "Patient experience." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Director of Patient Experience would like to note that sitting in the waiting room for 5 minutes does not constitute a full audit." He typed, "Buy you coffee after?" The reply came quickly, which he noticed. "You can tell me how the chairs feel." "Terrible," he typed. "Good, I ordered new ones. They come Thursday." He looked up from his phone at the waiting room, at the morning light coming through the entrance doors, at the ordinary and unheroic work of a place that was trying to take care of people. Then he looked back down at his phone and smiled. Not at anything in particular, just at the fact of it. He had owned this building for 15 years. It had taken him 11 days with a mop to understand what it was for.